As Chief Washington Correspondent for CBS, he's been giving us the news for almost 40 years. Currently, he's the moderator of the second longest-running TV show in history, Face the Nation. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on InnerVIEWS, our conversation with journalist Bob Schieffer. With all the cable channels and all the news that's out there, are we getting too much news?
Well, there's a lot of it. There's no question about that. I mean, you know, you're coming at this point where Tom Brokaw is resigning, where Dan Rather will be leaving. We really are coming to the end of an era because when those three men sat down in the anchor chair, there were about 5 choices on the television. Now there are 200 or 300. I think we have a lot of op-ed pages out there right now. Not so many places where you can get just a straight down the middle summary of the news or a report on the news. So I suppose it's good, but I think you have to be aware of what's going on, and I think today you have to watch 2 or 3 channels, just like you need to read a couple of newspapers to really get a full picture of what's going on.
Where do you get your news from?
Well, I'm a reader. I mean, I'm the generation of journalists. I started out as a newspaper reporter, so first thing I do, I get up very early in the morning, and I do it because I like to get up and read the paper before anybody starts stirring in the house. And so I read the Washington Post and the New York Times, and then I turn on the television and watch some of the early morning. But I spend a good 45 minutes to an hour. And it's my favorite time of the day, reading the paper and having my coffee. Somehow I still learn by reading, and it's just because of the age I am. And then when I get to the office, I scan 3 or 4 other newspapers, and of course you have the cable on in the office all day. So I guess I get it, like most Americans, for a lot of different places now. But I start out, as I always have, reading the paper.
A lot of people are concerned that the information we get isn't accurate today. We've seen these different stories come out about how people have made up news or they give it slanted view. How do we know that what we're getting is accurate, though?
Well, I think the first thing is it depends on where you get it. And I think those of us in journalism, I mean, credibility is our coin of the realm. I mean, CBS made a bad mistake clearly recently with the now famous Dan Rather story. And people say, what are you going to do about it? Well, we have brought in outside investigators to figure out what went wrong, to make sure that it doesn't happen again. That report ought to be out maybe in the next week or so. And once we find out what went wrong, then I guarantee you CBS is going to take corrective action. We have no choice. Credibility is our coin of the realm. If people don't believe us, then we cease to be. So we got to get this fixed. I don't know what they're going to do because I don't know yet what went wrong.
Is the problem overall the race to be first with information?
I think that's one of the things you have to be very careful about because clearly sometimes stories get on the air before they're ready to be on the air. And the thing is now, with the coming of the Internet, and this has more of an impact, I believe, than the cable has had on our industry, things move at warp speed. A story gets out, it may be right, wrong, or indifferent, but it's around the world in 20 seconds, and it starts showing up on all these websites. People start asking about it. We found out at CBS on 9/11 that we spent most of that day correcting incorrect stories that had cropped up on the Internet. Now, in the old days, the tradition in journalism is you correct your mistakes, you let your competitor correct his, and you ignore them. We had to correct these reports, otherwise we ran the risk of setting off mass hysteria and panic. You know, there'd be a report that there was an airplane headed toward the Sears Tower. We knew there was no airplane headed toward the Sears Tower. We had to go back to the same sources, check it out so we could be certain. Then it would be headed to the Atlanta airport, back to the same sources. We spent most of that day doing that, and that really has changed. I mean, that's the thing that has changed the most in this universe we have now.
We hear about some cable channels where they are given directives from higher-ups on what they can do and can't do. In your own career, was there ever a situation where you felt that you had to do something that you didn't feel comfortable with?
No, never. And I want to assure you, we we make our mistakes at CBS, but there's no theme of the day, nor has there ever been. I mean, and I would just go back to this episode recently with Dan Rather to underline that. 2 weeks before Dan did that story, I had done a commentary on Face the Nation saying, look, George Bush spent enough time in the National Guard to learn to fly a jet fighter plane. John Kerry volunteered to go to a war where they're shooting at people. Can't we just let it go at that and get on to something else? In other words, I was saying this is old news. Let's get on to what matters right now. Well, a week or so later, Dan did the story about George Bush's National Guard record. So if there had been any theme of the day, one of us was absent from class that day because we obviously had two very different points of view on that.
You bring up the president, and so, of course, I want to ask you about the debates. Having seen the men outside of being on camera, seeing them prep and all of that, what was your impression of them both?
Well, it was, I must say, it's the most interesting thing that I have ever done. The other part of it is being out there on the stage and being there, it was really high drama. I really had butterflies. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't get nervous being on television anymore. But I really had butterflies that night. I mean, I was all right after I got into it. But I think if I'd known that there had been 51 million people watching, I'm not sure I would have even gone out on the stage. But it was a very, very interesting experience. The other thing is, I could no more tell you who won that night than I could predict, when it's going to rain next. I mean, I'd be more accurate predicting what the weather's going to be. I thought that John Kerry won the first debate and really got himself back in the ball game. I thought the second debate was a draw, but the one I moderated, you're just so close to it. And it's just such an unusual situation. I have no idea who won because my head was filled with things like, did I ask John Kerry the last question or did I ask the president? Does he get a follow-up or does he? And you're trying to keep up with the time and make sure you get in all the questions that you want. And so, once it was over, it was fun and interesting and a real intellectual challenge. But I was also glad it was over. I had no idea who won.
Do you feel, though, they presented themselves on TV as they are?
A couple of times I thought they got past the talking points, and that's what you're trying to do. I mean, I thought that my job doing the debate moderating was different than when I'm on Face the Nation. On Face the Nation, I'm trying to move the story along. I'm trying to get the person I'm questioning to make news. I thought that my job at the debate was to give as accurate a picture of these two men as I possibly could to the American people. And so I went about it in a somewhat different way. And I do think we got a more complete picture of them. And really from some of the kind of what some people might think were oddball questions. I mean, when I asked them, what did they learn from the strong women in their lives? I think you got to, suddenly they weren't just spinning the spin. I mean, they were.
You got to get them off those talking points.
Yeah,
somehow.
and I think people got a very good picture of George Bush, or a little better picture of him, and John Kerry as well. When I posed the question, do you think homosexuality is a choice? That clearly was not a question that either of them had anticipated. And I think those answers got them off the talking points a little bit. So that's what you're trying to do. That's what I was trying to do. And from the standpoint of giving people a better understanding of who these men were, I felt pretty good about it.
How do you prepare for the debates?
I spent about 2 weeks. I went around and I talked to other reporters. I talked to people at think tanks. These debates, people like these debates, and they want to help you. I mean, I'd call people that, they might not return my phone call under regular circumstances. They get right back to you. I say, I need some help. Help me out on what I ought to be asking. I didn't ask people for questions. I just asked, tell me what I ought to be asking about. And I also wanted to make sure I was thoroughly briefed on things. I wanted to make sure I was up to speed on what the latest news on some particular topic was. And so that's how I did it. The Monday before the debate, I had about 100 questions. And I sat down with our staff at Face the Nation, the woman that's executive producer and our Washington bureau chief, and my 24-year-old assistant. And she said, Bob, you don't have a single question about women. And these guys are married to strong women. So that's where that question came from. The first question came from my wife, who we were having breakfast one morning, and she said, I wonder if our grandchildren will ever grow up in the kind of world where we grew up. And I thought that was a very good question to ask, and so I did a version of that for the first question in the debate. So, as I've always said to young reporters, news is where you find it, and I suppose the questions are where you find them. And so it came from a variety of places, but it was a very interesting exercise.
Considering all you saw and all you know and all that, were you surprised by the way the election turned out?
No, and nor would I have been surprised had it come out the other way. I knew it was going to be very close. And I didn't think anybody was going to run away with it. So I think I probably wasn't surprised, that George Bush won. I tell you what I am glad about, and that is that it was a clear victory. I said that night, on election night, I just hope that tomorrow whoever wins decisively, and we know who the next president is going to be. And it did come out that way. It wasn't a landslide, but George Bush won by, 3.8 million votes. So that was decisive. I tell you the other thing, I have completely flip-flopped on something. If there's still time for one more flip-flop in the campaign, I think it's time to do away with the Electoral College. I think it's just an invitation to mischief. And stop and think what would have happened if John Kerry had won Ohio. And all you need is a change of about 45,000 votes. He would have won the election and won the presidency, yet he would have lost the popular vote by 3.8 million votes. Mm-hmm. I think it would have been almost impossible for him to govern. I mean, remember, it took George Bush a long time to convince people, and some he never convinced, that he was a legitimate winner because he'd lost the popular vote by 500,000. And for John Kerry to face a Congress controlled by the other party after having lost the popular vote by 3.8 million, I just think it would have been virtually impossible for him to govern. I mean, this was a system that was set up so the small states would have a voice in the election. And yet, what it did is it took the big states out of it. You know, I was in California the week before the election, and there were no ads on television. Maybe that's a good thing. But the candidates never came to California, the largest state in the Union. And it's like they were out there, looking through binoculars at 8 or 9 states out here holding an election to decide who's going to be president. That just doesn't seem right to me. And I think it's time that we graduated from this Electoral College.
Do you think it'll happen, though?
No, I don't. Here's what I think. I think that had John Kerry won Ohio, I think a Republican-controlled Congress would already have started the ball rolling because it would take a constitutional amendment. But since the Congress is controlled by the same party that won the White House, I think it may be a little slower. But I just think it's time to start talking about it. There's power in the grassroots, and everywhere I go and every stop I make, I just start talking about it. And most people seem to agree with me, so, who knows what will happen. But I think it's just time we need to do something different here.
Okay, take me back. Where did this love of news come from for you?
I don't know. It's just what I always wanted to do. When I was in the 8th grade, I worked on the school newspaper, and I saw my first story set and typed that I had written, and I saw my byline on the top of it. And I just decided that's what I wanted to do. And I was always the editor of the school newspaper and all that through high school. But when I got to college, my mother was determined that I was going to be a doctor. So I managed to spend the first 2 years in pre-med. And when people ask me the question you just asked, what led me to journalism, the true answer is comparative anatomy. It didn't like me, and I didn't like it. So I switched over. And it was a very interesting experience, college was for me, because after spending 2 years in one major, I had to then use all those things like organic chemistry for my elective subjects, and I had to take seven courses to graduate. And as I tell people, I didn't graduate with honors, but I did graduate on time.
When did you come into CBS?
I came in 1969. I had worked for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I just got into television totally by accident. I had gone to Vietnam in 1965 for the newspaper, and I came back, and the local TV station, the NBC station in Fort Worth, asked me to come out and talk about the war. And I did, and afterward, I was on a little noon talk show. Afterward, they offered me a job, and it was $20 a week, more than I made at the paper, so I took it. So I went from $135 a week to $155 a week, and I needed the money. So I always say, I was one of the early print journalists who got into TV for the money. But then, and then I came to CBS.
Do you miss the being out there reporting in the trenches kind of stuff when you move up the ladder?
Well, I have been out there reporting for most of my life, and I always tell people, they say, how did you survive at one place as long as you have at CBS? And I truly believe this. I mean, this is a serious answer because I've always been a beat reporter. I was always outside the office, so I think I avoided a lot of the inner office politics that goes on, and because I very seldom ever came to the office. And I covered, even when I was a newspaper man, I was a police reporter for many years, and then later courthouse reporter, and then at CBS I started out covering the Pentagon, and then after that the White House, and then after that the State Department, and finally Congress, which until last year I had covered on a daily basis. I think that's where the core and the strength of news organizations is out on the beats. And I miss it, but I now that I really have stepped back from day-to-day coverage, but I still go out on politics. I was in New Hampshire, and I was in Iowa, and I was in South Carolina and Virginia, and all the primaries until we got a pretty good sense of who was going to get the nomination on the Democratic side, and then going up to the election. So I still get out a lot, and I mean, to me that's what the fun of journalism is getting out and getting to talk to the people and do the reporting.
But as the pressure builds to get the story and all that, and there are more people involved, and producers creating stories, and you getting in there and all, how involved are you when you're out in the field at this point in your career? When you're out there covering something like that?
Oh, yeah. I still write on my own stuff, as they say. I mean, I'm one of the old-fashioned guys, and that's the part that I like about it. I mean, I like putting together stories and telling stories, and the other part of it doesn't hold much of an attraction for me, and I don't like other people doing my work. I never trust them. I guess it's an ego thing, but I never think they can do it as well as I can. So you have to be very, very careful, too, because when you put your name on a story, you have to take responsibility for it. It's like when a politician makes a speech that somebody else has written. It's not that speechwriter's speech anymore. It's his speech, and he's the one that has to answer for it. So television journalism is collaborative, and you work with a cameraman, you work with producers, but in the end, it's your responsibility, which is why that I have always liked to do it all myself.
Now, let me take you in a little different direction. Face the Nation, 50 years. Why does that show work?
It's what people want, and the remarkable thing about Face the Nation is not that it's 50 years old. That is pretty unusual in television. It's the second oldest broadcast on television, actually. But that it is basically exactly the same program it was when it debuted November 7th, 1954. The first guest was Joe McCarthy. That was on the eve of the Senate taking up the debate over whether to censure him. And we don't do anything fancy. They didn't then, and we don't now. We just bring them in, sit them down at the table, and ask questions. And we have discovered that that's what the viewers of Face the Nation want. I don't know if this would work at any other time period of the day other than Sunday morning. But that's what people seem to want on Sunday morning. They want to read the newspaper. They want to reflect on the day's news. They want to see the news put in context. Every time that we try to change it, or people have tried to change it in the past. I mean, we had one guy one time that wanted to move it to Hollywood so we could put more entertainment news in. Wisely, wiser heads did prevail, and that didn't happen. But it just seems to be what people want. And what is unusual now is because that is the way we do it, it's rare. You almost never see it happen any other place at any other time on television except on Sunday morning. I mean, the talking heads you see on Sunday morning are far different than the talking heads you see at any other time of day. We don't have any screaming. We don't have any hollering. We don't try to find the most extreme people on any issue and, just let them scream at each other. We actually try to elicit information from them. And the audiences that we have built up over the years, that's what they want.
How do you prep before each show?
It depends on who the guest is. If it's something I've been covering all week, then I don't have to do very much. If it's not something I know something about, then I have to do research, and we have a very small staff. It's just myself and two other people. And we clip newspapers. We now Google a lot. And what we try to do is, and I try in the questioning, is I try to keep people from saying what they've already said. because now everybody is so sophisticated in the government and sports and in industry about information management and, you know, staying on message. I don't want to get them to say something they don't want to say or didn't mean to say. I want them to say exactly what they mean, but I want to see how much they know about that, you know, about what they're saying. So what I try to do is I may, you know, quote what they've already said. You know, I'll say, you know, you have said in the past that. And that way you can kind of get them past the first paragraph of the talking points anyway, and then, you know, take it from there. But what we're trying to do on Face the Nation is simply to find out more about why people take the positions they take and what are the reasons that they have taken those positions. That's what it's about.
Tell me how you found out you got the anchor job, that you were going to lead Face the Nation.
Well, what happened was that Leslie Stahl, who had done it for 7 years, was invited to be a correspondent on 60 Minutes, and she decided that's what they wanted to do. And somebody called me and said, would you sit in for Leslie for a while? And I said, sure, I'd love to, because I'd always wanted to do this job. It just had never been available. And so I did it a couple of weeks. They asked me to do it, so I did. I've had a very interesting career in that and this is the truth, I have never asked for a job at CBS. The only job I ever asked for was I asked them to hire me. I mean, you know, way back there in 1969. But the rest of it, I've just always been sent to do something. And my first real beat was the Pentagon, and that started when they fired the Pentagon correspondent, and they sent me out to the Pentagon to cover a news conference that the Secretary of Defense was having. I didn't know anything about defense, but, you know, it's like, remember that old movie, No Time for Sergeants, that Andy Griffith was in? He said the lieutenant had ROTC, and he thought that was some kind of disease. Well, I'd had ROTC, you know, so maybe that's why, that's not why they sent me out there, but I went out there just to fill in and managed and stayed 5 years. And then when Dan, after Nixon resigned, they decided to move Dan Rather, who was a White House correspondent, to New York, and so they moved me over to the White House, which I must say was like being the second man on the moon. I mean, you know, replacing the most famous correspondent at that time in the world. Everybody remembers him, but they don't remember the second guy that stepped out on the moon, you know. But it was a great experience. And,
how do you keep from getting bigger than the story? And I ask that because your name is so well known, and you're out there now covering these things. You're out there working with these people, but you are a notable in and of your own right. How do you balance that out?
It's sometimes I think that's overstated. I have always had the idea that the people I interviewed were more important than I was. And I mean, I think of myself, they're the people doing something. I'm the one writing down what they do. And I think there is a difference. And I think all of us have to kind of remember that from time to time. One of the things when I was writing this book about Face the Nation, that came to me as I was watching some of these programs over the years when I was putting together the DVD that goes with the book, is how pompous reporters can sometimes be. And, you know, I mean, some of them sound, you know, you'd think they were at question time at the British Prime Minister's, you know, question time in the British Parliament, you know, and like they think they're representing, you know, the civilized world or something. And really what reporters are supposed to do is just ask people questions, you know, and you're most effective when that is what you do. And so I do try to keep that in mind.
Yeah, something that probably works on the ego a little bit now. They just named a school after you.
Well, they did, and I must say, I mean, God knows I'm glad that most of the people who were my professors at TCU are not still alive, because I'm not sure their old hearts could take the shock of knowing that this student that barely got out of TCU has now had the journalism school named for him. But it's truly one of the most meaningful honors that I've ever received, and I'm going to work with TCU and try to do everything I can to help them recruit and develop journalists. You know, as the world becomes more complicated, the need for good reporters is even greater. And so it's a wonderful way to spend your life. So one of the things I try to tell young people who are thinking about being a reporter is that, you know, the professors, and maybe they're embarrassed, that is the reason they don't tell you this. What they tell you is it's a good way to do public service and have an impact. They don't tell you how much fun it is. And that's what I want young people to know. I mean, if it's the kind of thing you don't like, then you'd be miserable doing it. But if you're curious, if you like to meet people, if you just always wonder why does something work the way it works, then reporting can be a great life. And not only is it a meaningful way to spend your life, it's just really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that's what I want young people to know.
How much of your life did it eat up, though?
Well, there were times when I put it ahead of my family, and I wish that I hadn't. There were even times when I was in college. I got my first job when I was at the summer of my sophomore year. And once I got that job, and I was so carried away with it that all I wanted to do in college from then on was just get done with it so I could go on to do what I wanted to do. I wish now I had spent more time thinking and enjoying college life. But, that's the way it worked out, and in the end, it all worked out really good for me. I made a lot of mistakes, and I regret that some of those mistakes, I know I hurt people along the way, but other than that, I wish I had not hurt people, but I still think you have to make these mistakes, to learn, because I've always learned from my mistakes. I mean, the things at the time I thought were the worst things that ever happened to me turned out to be the best things from the standpoint of learning. And so I made my share of mistakes, and I'm sorry that I hurt people, but if I had it to do over, I think I probably would want to make those mistakes again because I learned so much from them.
Well, we are out of time, and all I can say now is thank you very much for coming in and talking with us.
Well, it was great.
Bob
I really
Schieffer.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. To order a transcript, call 866-652-3378 or send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.